Poor mechanic sings while fixing car. He doesn't know the woman listening is a music mogul. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The morning chill clung to the air like mist, seeping through the cracked garage door of Hart's Auto. The clang of metal against metal rang out in rhythm, accompanied by the low whir of a socket wrench turning stubborn bolts. Fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, casting long shadows over the stained concrete floor. Caleb Hart stood beneath the lifted hood of an aging Ford, sleeves rolled up to his elbows, grease etched deep into the creases of his knuckles. He worked without hurry, hands steady, movements practiced. And as he worked, he sang. Not loud, not for anyone else, just a quiet melody that rolled off his tongue like something remembered, not rehearsed. The kind of song that belonged to no one, but carried pieces of a dozen stories in its tune. It was soft, gravelly, and unexpectedly tender, a bit of soul wrapped in southern dust. He didn't know the sound carried. Out on the lot, a white SUV had pulled up with a slow crunch of tires on gravel. Its engine idled for a moment before quieting. Inside, Natalie King sat motionless in the driver's seat, one hand resting on the wheel, the other hovering over her phone. Her eyes weren't on her screen anymore. They were on the open garage, on the silhouette moving beneath the hood, and the voice, rough around the edges, sure, but real. She hadn't heard a voice like that in years. It wasn't polished. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't auto-tuned into oblivion or layered over 6 studio tracks. It was raw and aching and honest. The kind of voice that made people stop mid-sentence without knowing why. The kind that lived in smoky bars and dive joints, if it lived anywhere at all. Natalie slowly stepped out of the car, careful not to let the door slam. The cold bit at her through her designer coat, but she didn't move, didn't speak. She just stood there for a long moment, the sound washing over her like warmth. Caleb kept singing, unaware he was no longer alone. The SUV rolled to a slow stop, the gravel beneath its tires crackling like ice underfoot. One of the rear wheels sagged with the unmistakable slump of a flat, the rim biting into the dirt with every inch. For a moment the vehicle just sat there, engine humming low, heat fogging the inside of the windshield. Then, with a sharp click and a hiss of compressed air, the driver's door swung open. A woman stepped out. She moved like someone used to being in control, precise, measured, not a motion wasted. Her sunglasses masked her eyes, but everything about her posture said she wasn't panicked. Irritated, maybe. Inconvenienced, definitely. But not lost. Her coat was long and dark, cinched at the waist like it had never known a wrinkle, and her boots, heeled and impractical for country roads, clicked faintly as she crossed the gravel toward the deflated tire. She crouched, examined the damage without touching it, then stood and pulled her phone from her coat pocket. Her fingers moved with purpose, but her expression stayed neutral. She wasn't the type to curse at a flat or throw her hands in the air. She was the kind who called someone who called someone. But there was no signal. One bar, then none. A small exhale escaped her lips, not quite a sigh, but close. From the open bay of the garage, the sound of humming drifted out again. Not the buzz of tools or the chatter of a radio, but a man's voice, singing soft and unguarded. The melody curled into the stillness like smoke, warm and a little lonely. Natalie paused. She hadn't come here for a song. Her gaze shifted toward the open doors where a tall man in a faded flannel shirt moved around a battered old truck, completely unaware of her presence. His sleeves were pushed up, revealing forearms streaked with grease. And there was something easy about him, comfortable, like the music itself. For a long moment, she didn't move. Natalie King, CEO of one of the most influential music empires in the country, stood on the edge of a worn-down lot in a town whose name she couldn't remember, silently stranded, quietly listening. Natalie sat back down in the driver's seat, the leather sighing beneath her. She didn't bother closing the door. The chill crept in, but she hardly noticed. Her sunglasses slid down the bridge of her nose just enough to let her eyes drift past the cracked windshield and toward the open bay of the garage. The man, Caleb, she'd later learn, was still singing. It wasn't a song she recognized, and that intrigued her more than if it had been. No studio polish, no backup vocals, just one voice threading through the stillness like it belonged there. Rough in all the right places, tender in others. It didn't ask for attention, it simply was. Like sunlight filtering through dusty blinds, soft, familiar, and unexpectedly moving. She didn't know why it hit her the way it did. Natalie had spent years surrounded by voices, studio auditions, arena performances, voice coaches who could turn anyone into something marketable, something safe. She'd heard pitch-perfect sopranos and gravel-rich baritones, but it had all started to sound the same, manufactured, controlled, predictable. This was different. The mechanic wasn't trying to be heard. He wasn't performing. There was no camera, no stage, no pressure. He was singing because he wanted to, or maybe because he needed to. Like the music wasn't something he did, but something that had to get out, or it would drown him. Natalie felt something stir in her chest, a crack in the polished surface she kept so carefully maintained. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes narrowing as she took in the way his brow furrowed in focus, the way his foot tapped in rhythm against the concrete, the way his voice caught just a little at the end of a note, and instead of ruining it, made it real. It wasn't just talent, it was truth. She hadn't expected this, not in a place like this, not from someone like him, and yet here she was. A woman with a penthouse office and platinum plaques, sitting in silence on the edge of nowhere, listening, like it was the first time music had ever mattered. Caleb finally looked up from the engine bay, wiping his hands on an old rag slung over his shoulder. The truck behind him let out one last metallic groan as the hood dropped shut. He hadn't noticed the SUV until now, and the woman standing beside it looked more like she belonged in a glossy fashion spread than on the shoulder of a back road in Easton County. She was tall, poised, her features sharp in a way that made you feel like you'd seen her before, even if you hadn't. Her sunglasses were back in place, her arms folded lightly across her chest. Not defensive, just observant. Caleb offered a nod, polite but guarded. "Looks like you caught a nail. Rear passenger side's flat." She glanced over her shoulder at the deflated tire. "I figured. I've been driving on it for a while, hoping for a miracle." His mouth twitched. "Well, this town runs short on those, but I've got a jack and a spare if you've got the time." "I've got time," she said, though her tone suggested time was the one thing she didn't usually give away easily. He grabbed a low stool and crouched by the tire. "You passing through?" "Yeah," she said after a pause. "Road trip. Sort of spontaneous." Her voice was calm, polished, with just enough edge to keep people guessing. "I needed to get out of the city for a bit." Caleb arched a brow without looking up. "You don't strike me as the spontaneous type." She smiled at that. "Just a little. Maybe I'm not, but I'm trying." He didn't push. He never did. People told him things when they were ready. Or they didn't. That was fine, too. "Name's Caleb," he offered, tightening the lug nuts one by one. "Natalie," she replied. No last name, no need for one. Her voice caught his attention again, not for what it said, but how it said it. There was experience behind it. Not age, but miles. She wore elegance like armor, every word deliberate. She didn't mention the Skyline office waiting for her back in Manhattan, or the platinum records lining her walls, or the Grammy-winning artists who answered when she called. To him, she was just a woman with a flat tire, and for now, that was exactly how she wanted it. Caleb worked quickly, methodically. Years of kneeling on cold concrete had worn a quiet patience into his bones. He didn't fumble or stall, just got to the business of replacing the flat like it was second nature, which it was. Natalie stood nearby, arms still folded, watching him with the kind of detached curiosity she usually reserved for new artists in a studio. He didn't speak unless he needed to. No small talk, No fake charm, just the occasional instruction. Pop the trunk, step back. This'll only take a minute. And he never once looked at her like he was trying to figure out who she was. That alone was jarring. He hoisted the SUV with the floor jack he kept ready for emergencies, then unlatched the spare. His hands moved with a kind of grace she hadn't expected from someone wearing oil-streaked jeans and boots worn thin at the heels. The whole time, he hummed softly under his breath, something low and wordless, a shadow of the voice she'd heard earlier. 15 minutes later, the new tire was on and tightened, the tools packed away like they'd never been touched. Caleb stood, brushing off his hands with a satisfied grunt. "You're good to go," he said simply, stepping back. "Might want to get the rest checked out soon. Those treads are almost bald." Natalie reached into her bag, pulling out a slim leather wallet. "Let me pay you for your time." He shook his head before she could finish unzipping it. "No need." She blinked. "It's not just the tire. You stopped everything to help me." Caleb offered a one-shouldered shrug. "People break down. It happens. I'm just doing my job." She narrowed her eyes slightly, studying him again. "Most people don't do their job for free. I'm not most people." There was no pride in the way he said it, just fact. Natalie let the wallet rest in her hand for a moment before slipping it back into her bag. "Still, thank you." Caleb gave a small nod, already turning back toward the garage. "Drive safe." She watched him go, baffled, not by what he did, but by how easy it seemed to be for him to do it without expecting anything in return. Natalie lingered by the SUV longer than she needed to, pretending to check her mirrors, her phone, the alignment of her sunglasses, anything to buy time without making it obvious she was staying on purpose. She could have driven off the moment he walked back into the garage, but something in her resisted the urge to leave. From where she stood, the faint sound of tools clinking resumed inside, metal on metal, the quiet sigh of air compressors cycling. But that voice, the one that had stopped her in her tracks earlier, didn't return, not yet. She frowned slightly. Caleb had disappeared back into the shadows of the garage, crouched beside a beat-up pickup, headphones over his ears now. She could just barely see the curve of one shoulder as he leaned in, focused and silent. It occurred to her that if she wanted to hear it again, she'd have to prompt him. Natalie moved to the open doorway, standing just outside the frame. "You always sing when you work?" she asked, keeping her tone light, casual. Caleb looked up, surprised to see her still there. He tugged off his headphones. "Only when I forget, I'm not alone." "You're good," she said simply. He raised an eyebrow. "At fixing cars." She smiled. "At singing." That earned her a lopsided grin. "You caught the one time I didn't sound like a dying lawnmower, huh?" Natalie tilted her head, watching him. "No, I caught something most people spend their whole lives faking." Caleb blinked at her, unsure how to respond. Compliments weren't exactly a common part of his day. She let the silence stretch just enough. "Do you ever, I don't know, sing for real? Like really sing?" He shrugged, glancing back toward the old truck. "Used to. Not much time for dreams anymore." Natalie bit back the instinct to tell him dreams didn't have to die. They just needed direction. Instead, she said, "Well, if you ever start again, don't stop." Then she stepped back, letting the words hang. Caleb watched her return to her car, a flicker of something unreadable in his expression. And just before she drove off, he started humming again, quietly, unconsciously, like part of him wanted her to hear it. The SUV's engine was still idling, but Natalie hadn't shifted into gear. She sat there with her window halfway down, elbow resting casually along the frame, like she had all the time in the world. Caleb stood just inside the garage, wiping down a wrench with the edge of a faded shop towel. He wasn't used to people sticking around after a fix, let alone making conversation. "Seriously," she said, nodding toward him, "you've got something. That voice. It's not normal." Caleb gave a short laugh, the kind that barely reached his eyes. "No, ma'am. I think you mean it is normal, just not polished." Natalie watched him closely. That a choice? Or did life get in the way? He hesitated. It wasn't the kind of question most people asked, and it definitely wasn't the kind he usually answered, but something about the way she said it, curious not prying, made it easier to offer up the truth. "I used to sing a lot," he said finally, leaning against the doorway, the rag still in his hands. "Mostly small stuff, local gigs, open mics, a few county fairs if I got lucky. It wasn't anything big, but it felt big back then." "What happened?" "My folks passed," he said simply. No bitterness in his voice, just the weight of years. "Car accident. I was 20. Lila, my sister, she was 12. I had a choice to make." Natalie nodded slowly, letting the words settle. "Music doesn't pay rent," Caleb went on, eyes distant now. "So I took a job at the garage, then another, kept the lights on, kept Lila in school, got pretty good at rebuilding engines and forgetting how to sing for myself." He let out a breath, rubbing his thumb over the metal in his hand like it might tell him what to do next. "I still sing sometimes, when it's quiet, when I'm alone. Feels like the only place I don't have to be someone else." Natalie didn't say anything right away, but she didn't look away either. And in that silence, Caleb felt something shift, like maybe, just maybe, the part of him he'd buried wasn't gone after all. The tire was patched, the SUV was idling smooth, and the sky was starting to shift from soft gray to the pale blue of late morning. Natalie had said thank you, twice actually, and still hadn't left. She lingered at the edge of the driver's seat, one hand on the steering wheel, the other fidgeting with the edge of her coat sleeve. Caleb gave her a nod and stepped back, giving her space. "You're all set," he said, his voice low, even. "Take it easy on the back roads. That spare'll hold, but it's not meant for cross-country." She looked at him for a beat too long, like she was trying to memorize something. His face, maybe. His voice. That steady calm she didn't know she'd been craving until she found it in a grease-streaked garage in the middle of nowhere. "Thanks again," she said, "for the help and the song." He gave her the smallest smile, unsure how to answer that last part. She turned the key, and the SUV came to life with a smooth purr. The dashboard lights blinked awake. Caleb stepped aside, waiting for her to drive off. But she didn't, not yet. Instead, when he turned back toward the garage, Natalie leaned over the passenger seat and popped open the glove box. Her fingers moved quickly, precisely, slipping a small, cream-colored business card between the user manual and an old packet of napkins. No flourish, no explanation, just a quiet placement like planting a seed and walking away. She shut the glove box with a soft click, then put the car in gear. Caleb turned just in time to see her offer a final wave through the open window. "Take care, Caleb." He nodded once, watching the SUV ease onto the road and disappear down the street like it had never been there. A moment later, the garage was quiet again, just the faint buzz of the lights overhead and the wind nudging the doorframe. He didn't know about the card, not yet, but later, when he reached for something in the glove box while fixing the next car, his fingers would brush against smooth cardstock, and everything would begin to shift. The day had slipped into early evening by the time Caleb locked up the garage, the sky outside painted with strokes of lavender and rust. The buzz of engines and clatter of tools had faded, leaving behind the hum of cicadas and the occasional bark of a neighbor's dog. He climbed into his truck, tossing his toolbox onto the passenger seat with a tired grunt. At home, the lights were already on. Lila was in the kitchen, hunched over her textbooks at the table, a bowl of cereal growing soggy beside her. The radio played low in the background, something poppy and overproduced, but her pencil kept moving head down, brows knit in fierce concentration. "You eat yet?" Caleb asked as he stepped through the door, hanging his flannel over the back of a chair. "Cereal," Lila said without looking up. "Count?" "Barely," she smirked. "I'll microwave something later." Caleb ruffled her hair on the way to the fridge. "Microwaving doesn't count either. Then stop working late and cook something." She said it like a tease, but he heard the weariness beneath her voice. She missed him when he stayed past sunset. He missed being home before it. As he dropped his keys onto the counter, something fluttered from his jacket pocket and landed on the floor, white, rectangular, and out of place among the clutter. Lila bent to pick it up, turning it over in her hands. "What's this?" He glanced over. "No idea." She flipped the card toward him, reading aloud, "Natalie King, Monarch Sound Group, Executive Producer." Her voice lifted at the end. "Wait, is this the Monarch Sound, like the one that reps Aiden Rowe and Valia?" Caleb shrugged. "She had a flat tire. I fixed it." Lila's eyes widened. "And you didn't think to mention that part?" "She didn't exactly roll up with a red carpet, just another driver, far from home." Lila stared at him, incredulous. "Caleb, this is huge. You should call her." He waved her off. "It's just a card. Probably felt sorry for me. Doesn't mean anything." Lila looked down at the card again, then at her brother, the quiet man who sang to engines and never let himself want too much. "Maybe," she said softly, "but maybe it does." The skyline of Manhattan stretched like jagged steel teeth against the morning haze, the city already pulsing with its usual rhythm of horns, heels, and ambition. Natalie stepped into the private elevator of Monarch Sound's high-rise headquarters, coffee in one hand, her phone in the other, scrolling absently through emails she wouldn't remember reading. The elevator doors opened onto the top floor, glass walls, sleek furniture, and quiet pressure hanging in the air like perfume. Her assistant trailed behind, listing off meetings, streaming data, and artist delays, but Natalie wasn't listening, not really. She moved like muscle memory, nodding at the right moments, her heels silent against the polished floors. But her mind was still back in that dusty garage, on a voice she hadn't expected and couldn't forget. Caleb Hart. She hadn't known his last name until she'd Googled the garage out of curiosity. Pure curiosity, she told herself. A rundown shop with faded signage and a paper-thin website. No Yelp reviews, no Instagram. Just a phone number, an address, and a man who sang like he had nothing to prove. She'd been in this business long enough to know what smoke and mirrors sounded like. Most artists came with layers, ego, branding, noise. Caleb didn't. He wasn't chasing fame. He hadn't even realized he'd been heard, and that made him dangerous, in the best kind of way. Natalie stood at her office window, looking out at the city that never once stopped performing. Somewhere below, taxis weaved between delivery trucks. Billboards blinked promises no one believed. She sipped her coffee, cold now, and closed her eyes. There was something honest in that voice, something the charts hadn't touched in years. And honesty was rare currency in a world built on image and illusion. Her assistant hovered in the doorway. "The label from L.A. is on the line. Want me to push them?" Natalie shook her head slowly. Not yet. She turned away from the window, the city behind her. Somewhere in a town that probably didn't even have a Starbucks, a mechanic was still singing to himself between oil changes. And for the first time in a long while, Natalie King wondered if she'd finally found someone real. The next morning dawned quiet and slow in the Hart house. Caleb had already left for the garage by the time the sun started pushing golden fingers through the kitchen blinds. Lila sat cross-legged at the kitchen table, the business card in front of her like it might disappear if she blinked too long. She stared at it, then at her phone, then back again. It wasn't that she wanted to meddle, not exactly. But she also knew her brother, and she knew that if she waited for Caleb to chase something for himself, she'd be waiting until she graduated, got married, and had kids of her own. He'd already spent most of his 20s trading dreams for responsibilities. She couldn't sit by and watch him let this go too. So she opened her voice recorder and pulled up the video she'd taken a few months back. Caleb in the garage after hours, humming as he tuned up an old guitar he never played in front of anyone. She'd caught the moment without him knowing, the sound clear, rich, and heartbreakingly raw. Lila's thumbs hesitated over the phone. "Hi, this is Caleb Hart. I met you a few days ago when you had a flat tire." She paused, bit her lip, then backspaced half of it. "I fixed your car. You left your card. I wasn't sure if you were serious, but I figured I'd send this over anyway, just in case." She attached the audio clip, keeping the message short. Clean, like someone unsure but willing to take a step. Lila hovered over the send button for a long moment, her heart thudding. Then she tapped it before she could overthink it, and immediately tossed the phone onto the couch like it might burn her fingers. She sat back, breathing hard, adrenaline buzzing through her. Across the city skyline, hundreds of miles away, Natalie's phone vibrated quietly on her desk. She glanced at it mid-meeting, expecting another scheduling change. Instead, she saw an unfamiliar name, Caleb Hart. Her breath caught as she pressed play, and a single note filled the silence, unfiltered, unpolished, and impossible to ignore. Natalie smiled. So the kid did call. The phone rang just after noon, right as Caleb was elbow-deep in the undercarriage of an old Chevy with a busted axle and a stubborn rust problem. He didn't recognize the number flashing across the cracked screen of his shop cell. New York area code, sharp and clean. But curiosity made him wipe his hands on his rag and pick it up anyway. "Yeah, this is Caleb," he said, voice wary, not unfriendly. A crisp voice came through the line, professional and fast-talking. "Mr. Hart, this is Jamie Lorne, assistant to Natalie King at Monarch Sound Group. I believe you sent her a recording earlier this week?" Caleb blinked, stood up too fast, bumped his head on the axle, cursed under his breath. "Sorry. Who?" "Jamie Lorne," the voice repeated. "From Monarch Sound. Ms. King listened to your clip. She was impressed. Very impressed." Caleb squinted at the phone like it might be playing tricks on him. "Is this a joke?" "No, sir. I assure you this is a legitimate opportunity. Ms. King would like to offer you a private audition in New York City. Flight and hotel expenses covered. She'd prefer something low-key, no pressure. Just a chance to hear more from you, in person." Caleb let out a sharp breath, half a laugh. "You're telling me a woman who runs one of the biggest labels in the country wants me to fly out and sing for her?" "That's correct." He looked around the garage like he might catch someone filming the moment for a prank show. The dusty walls, the beat-up tool bench, the engine parts scattered like puzzle pieces, none of it felt like the kind of place where phone calls like this happened. "I think you got the wrong guy," Caleb muttered. I'm just a mechanic." Jamie's voice didn't waver. "Ms. King disagrees. She doesn't make these offers lightly, Mr. Hart." There was a pause, a long one. Caleb rubbed the back of his neck, the shop suddenly too quiet. "I'll have to think about it," he said finally. "Take your time," Jamie replied. "But I'd recommend sooner rather than later. Talent like yours doesn't stay hidden for long." The call ended, and Caleb stood there for a moment staring at the phone. Just a mechanic, right? Caleb sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the flight confirmation email, glowing from Lila's old laptop like it had no business being in their tiny house. His duffel bag lay half-packed on the floor, half because he'd zipped it up 3 times already, only to yank it open again, like maybe if he touched the clothes it would feel more real. It didn't. From the hallway, Lila leaned against the doorframe with her arms crossed, a triumphant smirk on her face. "You can thank me any time." Caleb rolled his eyes. "You pretending to be me and sending that clip wasn't exactly part of the plan." "You didn't have a plan," she shot back. "You were just going to let it die in the glove box like everything else you care about." That hit harder than he wanted to admit. He looked down at the floor, voice quieter. "It's not that simple." "Yes, it is," Lila said. "You're afraid." He didn't deny it, couldn't. He'd built a life on doing the dependable thing, the safe thing. You didn't gamble when someone else's well-being depended on you. He'd been taking care of Lila since she was 12, balancing bills, buying groceries with coupons, fixing cars, until his hands went numb. Music? That was a luxury, a risk. But still, Something inside him had stirred the moment Jamie called, something buried deep under the weight of engine grease and responsibility. "Maybe I just don't belong in that world," he muttered. Lila stepped into the room, softer now. "You don't have to belong to it, Caleb. Just see what it feels like to stand in it for once. Just once." He looked at her, at the way she still wore his old hoodie like armor, at the way she believed in him with a kind of reckless certainty he hadn't felt in years. And despite everything, the fear, the doubt, he realized he wanted to know, just a little, what if? He exhaled through his nose, pushed the bag closed, and zipped it with finality. "Fine, I'll go." Lila grinned wide, victorious. "But if this turns out to be a scam," Caleb warned, pointing at her, "I'm making you pay for the return flight." She laughed. "Deal." The taxi swerved through Midtown like it had a grudge against red lights, weaving between yellow cabs and black SUVs as if time itself were something you could beat if you just drove fast enough. Caleb sat stiffly in the back seat, one hand gripping the handle above the window, the other clenched around the strap of his worn duffel bag. Outside, the city rose around him, glass, steel, noise, and motion, all stacked on top of itself like it was trying to outrun gravity. He'd never been to New York. He wasn't even sure he liked cities. The air smelled like ambition and exhaust, and the sidewalks were packed with people who moved like they had somewhere more important to be than he'd ever imagined. Nobody made eye contact. Nobody said hello. It was the opposite of Easton County, where someone would wave at you from the porch even if they didn't know your name. Caleb shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He'd worn his cleanest pair of jeans and his best flannel, thinking it was decent enough for a meeting. Only now he looked down at his scuffed boots and felt like someone had dropped a farmhand into a boardroom. When the cab pulled up outside a sleek glass building that seemed to shimmer under the weight of its own importance, the driver didn't even glance back. "Monarch Sound," he grunted. "This it?" Caleb swallowed. "Yeah, I guess so." He stepped out into a gust of wind funneled between skyscrapers, slinging his bag over his shoulder like it could shield him. The doorman raised an eyebrow but said nothing as Caleb passed, boots thudding against marble tile that looked like it belonged in a museum. Inside, everything was white and silver and too quiet. The receptionist barely looked up as she asked his name, then made a call that ended with, "Mr. Hart is here." Mr. Hart, that didn't sound like him, not really. He rode the elevator up with a woman in a pantsuit who didn't blink once the entire ride. When the doors opened, Caleb stepped out alone onto a floor that smelled like coffee and money. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the skyline like art. He felt like a wrinkle in a perfect page. But still, he walked forward. The recording studio was nothing like Caleb had imagined. It wasn't flashy or modern or decked out in neon lights like the music videos he used to watch on borrowed Wi-Fi. It was quiet, intimate, dim lighting, soundproofed walls, a single mic standing under a low-hanging pendant light like it was waiting for a confession. Natalie was already inside when he walked in, seated behind the glass in the control room. She didn't wave, didn't speak, just watched him through the pane with a calm, unreadable expression. She wore headphones, one side pulled slightly off her ear, her eyes steady. Jamie gave Caleb a nod as he entered. "You'll be alone in the booth. Take your time." Alone, right. Caleb stepped into the small vocal space and set his duffel down beside the chair, his fingers running along the edge of the mic stand. The last time he sang into a mic, it was at a local bar's open mic night 4 years ago on a stage that doubled as a karaoke platform and smelled like spilled beer. His stomach twisted. Still, he put on the headphones, adjusted the mic, took a deep breath. Then he closed his eyes. The first notes came out shaky, thin, his voice caught in his throat as if it knew it didn't belong here. But he pushed through, dropped into the melody like it was something he used to wear and had almost forgotten how. And slowly it came back. The nerves fell away, piece by piece. He sang a song he'd written years ago, late one night on the back porch after another shift at the garage. a slow, aching thing about holding on and letting go at the same time. His voice wasn't perfect. It cracked once, wavered a little, but it carried weight, real weight, and it filled the room with something you couldn't teach in a vocal lesson. In the control room, Natalie closed her eyes. She didn't move, didn't take notes. She just listened. And when the last note faded, when Caleb finally opened his eyes and lowered his hands from the mic, there was a long, stretching silence. Then a soft voice came through the intercom. That, Natalie said, was real. Caleb sat across from Natalie in a glass-walled office that looked out over a city too big to breathe in all at once. The afternoon light spilled in across the polished floor, glinting off gold record plaques that lined the back wall. Everything in the room felt deliberate, tasteful, expensive, controlled. Unlike him. He tugged at the sleeve of his flannel shirt, suddenly aware of the faint smell of motor oil still clinging to the cuffs. Natalie sat behind a desk made of dark wood and clean lines, a tablet in front of her, but her eyes were on him. "You're not polished," she said, her voice even, measured. "And that's exactly why I'm interested." Caleb raised an eyebrow. "That a compliment?" "It's a warning," she replied, leaning forward slightly. "You've got something people don't hear much anymore, truth. And the second the industry gets a hold of truth, it tries to reshape it, package it, monetize it." He didn't speak, just let the words settle. She slid the tablet toward him. "This is a development deal. No pressure, no deadlines. Just time, studio work, vocal coaching, songwriting support. You'd work with a producer I trust. Low exposure, for now. But if this works..." She gave a small shrug. "You'll be heard." Caleb stared at the screen. There were numbers, more than he'd seen in his bank account in years, details he barely understood, a nameplate version of a dream. "But," she added, voice softening, "you need to understand something." He looked up. "Fame doesn't fix people," she said. "It changes them, sometimes slowly, sometimes all at once. You'll be praised and picked apart in the same breath. You'll question why you ever started, and if you're not careful, you'll lose the very thing that made someone like me notice you in the first place." Caleb leaned back in his chair, heart pounding harder than it had in the booth. He didn't trust much. Life had taught him not to. But in that moment, he didn't feel sold to. He felt seen, and that scared him more than anything. The hotel room was too clean, too quiet. The kind of place where the sheets were tucked too tight, and everything smelled faintly of lemon and money. Caleb stood by the window, arms crossed, staring down at the glowing grid of the city below, like it might offer some kind of answer. It didn't. The contract sat on the desk behind him, untouched since he brought it back from Monarch. Black ink on white paper, full of promises that didn't feel real, not yet. Not when home was still 1,000 miles away, and the only music he'd known lately came from humming between oil changes. He rubbed the back of his neck and reached for his phone. A few missed texts from Lila. She'd asked about the flight, about the studio. She hadn't pushed, not yet, but he knew her. She was waiting for him to come back with something more than just a story. He should have felt excited. He should have felt lucky. This was what people dream about, right? The moment someone powerful notices you, believes in you, offers you a door that never opens for guys like him, but all he felt was torn. What if he said yes, and everything changed, and not for the better? What if he got swallowed whole by this world? What if he lost whatever it was that made Natalie King pause in the first place? And deeper still, what if he left Lila behind? She was 16, smart, tough, but still just a kid trying to hold it together with a brother who'd done everything he could to keep the world from falling apart around her. Caleb had made a promise the night their parents died. She'd never feel alone, not if he had anything to say about it. He picked up the contract, stared at it like it might turn into something simpler if he held it long enough. His heart said yes. His gut said slow down. And somewhere in between, his whole life teetered like a truck on a jack, one bolt away from tipping. Maybe chasing a dream wasn't the hard part. Maybe it was not knowing if you were allowed to have one. The morning Caleb returned to Easton County, the sky was pale and overcast, the kind of gray that hung low and made everything feel slower, heavier. He pulled into the gravel drive beside the house, tires crunching the way they always had. But something was different, even before he stepped out of the truck. Lila burst through the front door in her mismatched socks and hoodie, practically throwing herself at him. "You're back," she said, squeezing him around the middle like she was still 12. "Yeah," he chuckled, hugging her back. "Didn't get eaten by the city after all." She grinned. "You'd better not have. I've been telling everybody you were out there blowing up." He raised a brow. "You told people?" She blinked. "Caleb, this is Easton. The second you got on a plane, half the town knew. By the time you landed, the other half had already added you to their prayers or playlists." He sighed, pulling his duffel from the bed of the truck. "I was gone 3 days." "Long enough," she said, smirking. "Welcome back, superstar." At first it was just a few people, Miss Judy at the corner store, who asked how the big city music scene was treating him. A couple of high school kids who nodded in his direction at the gas station, trying to play it cool. Then it started snowballing. Old Man Ray, who never cared much for music outside of Johnny Cash, called him the singer now. A customer at the garage asked for a selfie after an oil change. Even the local diner added the heart attack sandwich to the menu. 2 eggs, 3 strips of bacon, and a side of, apparently, pride. Caleb tried to laugh it off, to keep his head down, just keep working. But he felt it, those looks, not unkind, just different, like they were seeing something in him they hadn't before. Like he wasn't just Caleb, the mechanic who fixed transmissions and showed up early on snow days. He was the guy who might be going somewhere, the guy who got noticed. And for the first time in his life, that didn't feel like a compliment. It felt like pressure. The first voice coaching session took place in the corner of Caleb's garage, between a stack of worn-out tires and a dusty workbench stained with oil. He'd rigged up his laptop on an overturned toolbox, headphones plugged in, mic clipped awkwardly to the edge of a shelf. It wasn't exactly a soundproof studio, but it was what he had. Natalie's producer, a sharp-eyed woman named Wren, with a calm voice and zero tolerance for excuses, appeared on the screen. She didn't bother with pleasantries. "All right, Caleb," she said, "let's start with breath control. Sing it like you mean it, not like you're hoping nobody hears." He tried. God, he tried. But it felt strange, foreign to sing in front of a camera, to have someone watching every flicker of emotion, every break in his voice. Back in the garage, alone with the whir of tools and the scent of grease, it was easy, safe, but now each note felt exposed. Wren stopped him halfway through a verse. "You're holding back." Caleb frowned. "I'm not trying to." "You're thinking about how you sound. I need you to feel it. If you're afraid to let people hear the cracks, why should they care about the rest?" He stayed quiet. After the call ended, Caleb sat back against the wall, the cold from the concrete seeping through his jeans. His hands were still calloused from last week's brake job. His boots still stained, but everything felt different now. The truth was, he didn't know how to be both things at once, mechanic and musician. And the more he leaned into this new world, the more he felt like he didn't belong in either. He missed the days when music was just for him, when he didn't have to wonder if he was good enough, or what came next, or who was listening. Now even his own voice felt like a stranger's. The next session was scheduled for Tuesday. He thought about canceling, but deep down, a part of him, the part that still remembered singing on the back porch under a sky full of stars, didn't want to give up. Not yet. The wind carried a chill that felt sharper than usual as Caleb stepped onto the back porch, guitar in hand. It was late, past midnight, and the town had gone still, save for the occasional rustle of trees and the low creak of the porch swing, swaying on its own. Lila was asleep. The garage was locked. But sleep didn't come easy anymore, not since the session started, not since the contract became real. He settled into the chair his dad had built years ago, the wood weathered but solid. His fingers drifted over the strings like muscle memory, coaxing out a soft chord. It should have felt grounding, like it used to, but something sat heavy in his chest tonight, an ache he couldn't quite name. Then, without warning, his father's voice rose in his head, clear, bitter, and cold as the wind. "Music don't pay bills, Caleb. Dreams are what you give up when people count on you." He hadn't heard it in years, not like this. But suddenly it was there again, echoing through him like it never left. The harsh words said in a kitchen thick with silence and broken promises. His father, after a long shift, staring at the worn guitar in Caleb's hands like it was the enemy. "You want to waste time singing to stars while your sister goes hungry? You better wake up." Caleb's jaw clenched. He hadn't been that kid in a long time. He'd done everything right since then, taken over the bills, held the family together when the rest of it fell apart, gave up the songs when they started to feel like guilt. But now, sitting here, guitar in lap, and that voice crawling through his memory like a ghost, he couldn't help but wonder if those words had shaped him more than he realized. Had he carried them this whole time? Let them weigh down his voice, even when Natalie told him it was the one thing that set him apart. He played another chord, softer this time, then another, not for anyone else, just to remind himself it was still his, even if the echoes were louder than the song. Natalie stepped out of the rental car and into the heart of Easton County, the gravel crunching under her heels like the place was warning her she didn't belong. The town stretched quiet and open around her, stitched together by pickup trucks, weathered porches, and fading signs that hadn't changed in 20 years. It was a far cry from New York's skyline and glass towers, but the stillness here, it was honest. She found Caleb at the garage, bent over the engine of a beat-up sedan with sweat slicking the back of his neck, and his flannel sleeves rolled up past the elbow. He didn't see her at first. He was focused, brow furrowed, hands moving fast but careful, like the machine might fall apart if he looked away for even a second. When he finally glanced up and saw her standing there, his face changed. Not shocked exactly, but surprised in that quiet, vulnerable way that caught her off guard. "Natalie?" he asked, straightening, wiping his hands on a rag that had seen better days. "What are you doing here?" "I needed to see it," she said simply. "Where you come from? What you're carrying?" She glanced around the shop, tools everywhere, papers stacked in corners, the radio softly humming in the background. She saw the calendar marked with Lila's school events, the to-do board covered in names and unpaid invoices. This wasn't just where he worked, it was where he lived. Every square foot of it told a story he hadn't put into words yet. "You're not just working full-time," she said almost to herself. "You're keeping the roof up, the bills paid, your sister in school, and somehow trying to fit a music career between oil changes." Caleb looked away, rubbing his jaw. "I'm doing what I've always done, holding things together." "You shouldn't have to choose between surviving and becoming," she said. He gave her a look that stung. "I don't get the luxury of chasing both." She didn't reply. Instead, she stepped closer, lowering her voice. "I came here to help build something," she said, "but I didn't expect to care this much if it burns." And for the first time, she wasn't sure if she meant the music or him. That evening, the air outside the house hung heavy with the scent of cut grass and late summer heat. The porch light buzzed faintly above them, casting a warm glow over the railing where Natalie leaned, wineglass in hand, her heels long since abandoned at the door. Caleb sat beside her on the porch swing, a beer resting between his palms, his boot tapping a slow rhythm on the wood beneath them. They hadn't spoken in a while, not since dinner, when Lila had teased them both just enough to make things awkward in the way only a teenage girl could. Now the silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was charged. Natalie looked over at him. "You know, for a guy who hates attention, you're pretty magnetic when you let your guard down." Caleb smirked, shook his head. You're a terrible liar for someone who signs million-dollar artists." "I'm not lying," she said, voice soft. "You just don't see what the rest of us do." He glanced at her, then looked away quickly. "Maybe that's because what you see isn't real." "You think I can't tell the difference by now?" she asked. "Caleb, you're the realest person I've met in years. That's exactly the problem." He set the bottle down with a quiet clink, elbows on his knees, voice low. "You live in glass towers and boardrooms. I live in a house with leaky pipes and a garage that breaks even if I'm lucky. You don't belong here. And you don't belong in a cage you built for yourself," she shot back, heat rising in her tone. "You think this is about class, money? Caleb, this is about you. You're pushing me away because you think you're not enough." He stood suddenly, the swing rocking behind him. "I know I'm not enough, Natalie. You've got a whole world waiting for you back there. I've got oil stains and overdue bills." She stood too, eyes meeting his. "I didn't come here for convenience. I came here because something about you makes me want to stay." Caleb hesitated, jaw tight, every muscle pulled taut like a wire. But he couldn't say the words he wanted to, couldn't let her in. So instead he turned, walked inside, and left her on the porch, glass in hand, heart uncertain, and the truth hanging in the air like smoke. It started with a text. Then 3, then 37. Caleb's phone buzzed nonstop on the workbench as he adjusted the timing belt on a '98 Corolla. He ignored it at first, figured it was Lila needing lunch money, or maybe the parts supplier finally returning his call. But when the buzzing didn't stop, he finally peeled off his gloves, wiped his hands on a rag, and checked the screen. The first message was from an old high school friend. "Dude, is this you?" Attached was a link. The second was from Jamie. "Call me, now." The third was from Lila, in all caps. "You're trending." Caleb blinked. Trending. With a growing sense of dread, he clicked the link in the first message. It took him to a video, grainy but clear enough, of him in the studio during that first raw session, singing the song he'd written years ago. His voice cracked on the bridge, just like it had in real life. There were no backing tracks, no edits, just him. And in the background, barely visible behind the glass, Natalie's eyes were closed. The caption read, "The voice that stopped a mogul mid-sentence, meet Caleb Hart." 2 million views. His heart sank. He didn't post this. He hadn't even told people about the session. And yet, here it was, circulating on TikTok, Instagram, music blogs, even Reddit. The comments were a blur of fire emojis, raw talent praise, and speculation. Someone had even edited a clip of him working on a car into the video, overlaying it with the words, "The Singing Mechanic." Caleb dropped the phone like it had burned him. Out in the waiting room he could already hear it, the low hum of his voice playing on someone's phone. One of his regulars, headphones halfway off, asking, "Is that Caleb?" He turned toward the garage door, breathing hard. His safe place, his space, wasn't safe anymore. He felt exposed, cracked open. He wasn't ready for this. Not like this. And the worst part, somewhere deep inside, a tiny voice whispered, they were always going to find out. The storm rolled in quietly at first, whispers, glances, murmurs in the aisles of the grocery store. At the corner diner, people paused their conversations when Caleb walked in, half smiling, like they knew something he didn't. The old-timers called him Hollywood now, not out of malice, but with that small-town edge that made it clear he was no longer just the mechanic. And then the headlines hit. Blue-collar heartthrob, the mechanic with $1 million voice. From Grease to Gold, the mystery singer who stole the internet. Who is Caleb Hart, and why is he hiding in a garage? Pictures surfaced, fuzzy shots taken through his garage window, one of him at the gas station pumping fuel, even one of him walking Lila to school. None of it was scandalous. But it wasn't private anymore either. He hadn't asked for this. He hadn't agreed to be a spectacle. Lila took the worst of it. It started small. Whispers in the hallway, comments slipped between locker doors. What's it like having a famous brother? Did he forget about you yet? Then it turned crueler, girls mocking the way she dressed, boys daring each other to flirt with her for a reaction. One day she came home silent. Her backpack dropped at the door like it weighed too much. She went straight to her room and closed the door. Caleb followed her in after a few minutes. Found her sitting on the edge of her bed, jaw tight, tears she refused to let fall, burning in her eyes. "I didn't ask for this either," she whispered. And he didn't have an answer, because she was right. The fame he hadn't wanted was starting to rot everything he cared about. The garage felt different now. Visitors showing up not for car trouble, but for selfies and signatures. Customers whispered instead of joked. Even Wren's coaching had turned sharper, more urgent, like they were on a deadline no one had mentioned before. Everything was moving faster than he could hold on to. And in the quiet, after Lila shut her bedroom door, Caleb realized the thing he'd thought was a dream, it might just be a spotlight, burning holes through the life he'd fought so hard to keep whole. It started with a knock on the garage door after closing. The sun had already dipped below the trees, leaving streaks of burnt orange across the sky. Caleb, tired and greasy, figured it was a customer running late or maybe one of the new YouTube fans trying to catch a glimpse. But the man who stepped inside wasn't from around here. Tailored coat, polished shoes, and a smile so clean it felt artificial. He looked like a shark in a pond full of catfish. Caleb wiped his hands on a rag, cautious. "Can I help you?" he asked, standing beside the hood of a half-fixed Dodge. The man extended a perfectly manicured hand. "Riley Dawson, talent executive with Horizon Music Group. I think we both know you're more than a local mechanic now." Caleb didn't shake it, just stared. "You're with a label?" "One of the fastest growing in the business," Riley said smoothly. "We've worked with artists you've probably heard on the radio a dozen times. You, Caleb, you're what we call an untouched market, a clean slate, authentic, and most importantly, buzzworthy." Caleb crossed his arms, still not buying it. "Natalie didn't mention anything about Horizon." Riley's smile widened. "That's because Natalie King isn't the only person who sees your potential." He handed over a slim folder. Inside, glossy photos, mock-up marketing campaigns, a full branding proposal, Caleb's name in bold, paired with images of him in sleek jackets, standing beside a luxury truck, posed and styled like he'd walked out of a country pop billboard. "We'll assign you a full team, image consultant, PR manager, custom songwriting. All you need to do is show up, sing, and sign. You'll never have to touch another wrench again." Caleb thumbed through the folder, a slow unease spreading in his chest. It was everything people said they wanted. Fame, control, money. But none of it looked like him. The eyes in those pictures didn't carry grease under the nails or the weight of raising a sister. They were hollow, manufactured. "Why now?" Caleb asked quietly. "Why me?" "Because you're already going viral," Riley said. "Natalie gave you a start, but we'll take you all the way." He left the folder behind on the workbench, and as Caleb watched him walk off into the fading light, a sick feeling settled in his gut. It wasn't just attention anymore. It was a game, and he was the newest piece on the board. The rehearsal room was stifling. Too many lights, too many voices, and none of them his. Caleb stood center stage in a small midtown studio, headphones around his neck, guitar slung but untouched. Wren paced in the corner, muttering with the sound engineer. Natalie stood near the control booth, arms crossed tight, eyes sharp behind her calm. The track played again, backing instruments, backing vocals, and a version of Caleb's song so dressed up in synthetic polish it barely resembled the raw version he'd first sung in that quiet booth weeks ago. "Try it with more punch," Wren called out. "Push the chorus, more energy." Caleb stared at the mic like it had betrayed him. "It's not supposed to have more energy," he said, voice low. "It's supposed to feel empty there. That's the point." Wren didn't look up. "That's not how it reads to listeners." Caleb's hands clenched into fists at his sides. Then maybe the problem isn't the song. The room went quiet. Natalie stepped forward, careful. Caleb, this is just part of the process. We're shaping it for the market. He snapped. No, you're shaping me for the market. Her jaw tensed. You knew this wouldn't be easy. No, he said, louder now, eyes blazing. What I knew was that I trusted you. I let you into my world. And now everything's spinning out. Lila's getting dragged into stuff she didn't ask for. Strangers are showing up at the garage, and I can't take 2 steps without someone telling me who I should be. Wren opened her mouth, but Caleb turned to Natalie, voice sharp and raw. You promised me this wouldn't change who I am, but look at this. He gestured around the studio to the designer notes scribbled across his lyrics, the stylists waiting outside. This isn't me. This is a product. Natalie stepped toward him, quiet but steady. You're scared. I'm done, he said. And before anyone could stop him, he tore off the headphones, slammed the guitar into its stand, and walked out the door, leaving stunned silence and his song, now just a remix of what it used to be, echoing behind him. The rain came soft and steady that night, tapping against the roof of Caleb's porch like it had nowhere else to be. The world outside was quiet, save for the occasional growl of thunder in the distance. Caleb sat on the steps, hoodie pulled over his head, a beer sweating in his hand, the unfinished folder from Horizon still sitting beside him, unopened. He didn't hear Natalie's car pull up, didn't know she was there until her boots clicked against the wet boards. You always run when something scares you? She asked gently. He didn't look at her. Only when it's smart to. She stepped closer, but kept her distance, rain misting her coat. I didn't come here to fight. Caleb let out a slow exhale. Then why did you come? There was a long pause, filled with the soft hiss of water against wood. I came because I think you deserve the truth, she said. That made him look up. Her face was bare of makeup, her expression stripped of all the poise she usually carried like a second skin. I wasn't always this person, she said. I didn't grow up in a penthouse. I didn't have industry connections. I was the kid singing in subway tunnels and sweeping floors in recording studios just to stay close to the music. Caleb blinked, surprised. I clawed my way into this world, she continued. And along the way, I lost track of who I was. I let people tell me how to dress, how to speak, what I had to become to matter. And for a long time, I believed them. She stepped closer now, the porch light casting gold along the edges of her rain-damp hair. When I first heard you sing, it wasn't just about the music. It was the feeling, that truth in your voice. It was the same truth I buried years ago to survive in this industry. Her voice broke just slightly. I didn't help you because I saw a business opportunity. I helped you because you reminded me of everything I loved before I sold myself for success. Caleb looked at her for a long, quiet moment. The walls between them softened, not gone, but cracked enough to let something through. And for the first time in days, he didn't feel alone. The decision didn't come in a dramatic moment. There was no shouting, no storming out, no slammed doors. Just Caleb, sitting in the garage long after closing, staring at the 2 contracts laid out on the hood of an old Impala, Natalie's development deal, Horizon's glitzy offer, like they were 2 halves of a life he didn't quite believe he belonged in. The rain had stopped. The world outside was still. Too still. He ran his fingers over the edge of the papers. So much ink, so many promises, but neither one of them felt like his. He thought about Lila, about how quiet she'd been lately, about how she no longer mentioned his music like it was magic, like it lit something in her. The sparkle in her eyes had dimmed under the weight of paparazzi rumors and fake smiles. He thought about the garage, grease under his nails, his name on the sign, the way people came in with broken things and trusted him to make them work again. He missed that. The simple honesty of fixing something with his hands. No filters, no spotlights. By the time the sun rose, Caleb had made his choice. The next day he called both labels, Natalie first. "I can't do it," he said quietly. "I'm not built for that world. I thought maybe I could be, but I was wrong." She was quiet for a long moment. "Are you sure?" "No," he admitted, "but I know I'd rather lose the chance than lose myself." She didn't argue, just exhaled softly, like she'd expected it all along. "If you ever change your mind—" "I know," he said. "Thank you for everything." Then he called Horizon and gave them a firm, polite no. The silence that followed was strange at first. No rehearsals, no interviews, no producers weighing in on his tone, just the steady rhythm of the garage, the clang of tools, and the soft hum of life settling back into its old shape. To most, it looked like he'd walked away from everything. But Caleb knew better. He hadn't quit the dream. He'd just taken it back. The morning light poured through the garage's roll-up doors, golden and slow, painting the concrete in warm streaks. The air smelled like motor oil, rust, and freshly brewed coffee. Familiar, grounding. Caleb stood at his workbench, tightening the bolts on a carburetor like he'd done 100 times before. The radio played low from the corner shelf, some old blues track humming under the clatter of tools. Everything looked the same. Same walls, same calendar, with the date circled in Lila's handwriting. Same chipped coffee mug that lived dangerously close to the edge. But inside Caleb, something had shifted. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, steady, like an engine purring just right after a long, hard fix. He wasn't the same man who had stood in this spot a month ago, wondering if he'd missed his one chance at something bigger. He'd gone. He'd seen it. And more importantly, he'd chosen to come back. Not because he was afraid, but because he finally understood that coming home wasn't the same as giving up. The bell above the garage door jingled. Mrs. Hanley from down the road poked her head in, waving with her usual chipper energy. "Morning, Caleb," she called. "My poor Buick's making a sound like it's choking on its own pride." Caleb smiled, wiping his hands on a rag. "Bring her in. I'll see what I can do." As he opened the hood and bent down to listen, Lila walked in with 2 coffees in hand and a bag of gas station muffins. "You sure you're okay?" she asked, handing him a cup. He nodded. "Yeah, for the first time in a long while, I actually am." She studied him for a second. "You look different." "Feel different," he admitted. "Like I've still got something to sing about, just not in a studio full of strangers." He didn't need the spotlight to know who he was anymore. He had his hands, his voice, his people, and that was enough. For now. And maybe, just maybe, the music would find its way out again, when the time was right. The community center hadn't changed in years. Same cracked linoleum floors, same fold-out chairs arranged in uneven rows, same string of Christmas lights someone had decided to leave up all year because they still worked, didn't they? The place was packed. Neighbors, kids, retirees, and local business owners who'd all shown up for the annual charity auction and spaghetti dinner to raise money for the town's one and only food pantry. It was a small-town tradition. Homemade pies, mismatched dishes, and music if someone felt brave enough to volunteer. Lila nudged Caleb's arm as he hovered near the back, paper plate in hand. "They're asking if anyone wants to sing." He shook his head, smiling gently. "I think I've filled my quota for the year." She gave him that look, part daring, part challenge. One song, for the pantry. He sighed and she grinned, already knowing he'd cave. Moments later, he found himself at the front of the room, the mic slightly too tall, the crowd murmuring with surprise and a few knowing smiles. Someone adjusted the old PA system, and it crackled in protest. Caleb cleared his throat, nodded to the volunteer guitarist who'd been strumming earlier, and stepped up to the mic. "No backup," he said. "No lights, just one song. Hope that's all right." A few people clapped. Someone hollered, "Give it to us, Caleb!" And then he sang. It wasn't polished. It wasn't rehearsed. But it was real. His voice carried through the room like a slow current, tugging at memories folks didn't know they had. It was the kind of song that didn't ask for attention. It earned it, quiet and rough around the edges but full of heart. By the end, no one clapped immediately, not out of indifference, but because they were still holding on to the last note, like they didn't want to let it go. Then the applause came, warm and unforced. Caleb stepped back, cheeks flushed but smiling. He didn't need cameras. He didn't need headlines. He just needed this. A room full of real people, a song worth singing, and the quiet joy of doing it on his own terms. For once, that was everything. The applause still echoed in Caleb's chest as he stepped off the makeshift stage, the warm buzz of it following him like a quiet hum. He passed familiar faces. Mrs. Hanley dabbing her eyes with a napkin, Joe from the feed store giving him a proud clap on the back, a couple of teenagers whispering and smiling like they'd just seen someone famous. He shook hands, nodded thanks, accepted a paper plate of brownies he didn't ask for. But then he saw her. Near the back of the room, half in shadow beneath the faded basketball banner that hadn't been taken down since 1998, stood Natalie. No fanfare, no assistant trailing behind her, no clipboard, no pen, no contract tucked discreetly under her arm. Just Natalie. She wore jeans and a black coat, her hair pulled back in a low knot, and a look on her face that stopped him in his tracks. Not ambition, not calculation, just pride. And something softer beneath it, something like peace. Their eyes met across the room, and neither of them moved at first. The chaos of chatter and clinking forks melted around them, like they were standing in a quieter place than the one everyone else was living in. Finally, she stepped forward, weaving through the crowd without drawing attention. No one even seemed to recognize her here, which felt oddly perfect. "You came?" he said, voice low and surprised. She nodded. "I told you I would, if you ever started singing again." He smiled, slow and genuine. "I didn't think you'd show up without a contract." She tilted her head, a playful glint in her eye. "I didn't come for business." He studied her for a beat, the smell of pasta and powdered sugar still lingering in the air, his hands slightly shaking from the adrenaline of the song. "Why did you come?" Natalie looked up at him, voice barely above a whisper. "To remember what music sounds like when it's honest." And in that moment, standing in a small-town gym beneath flickering lights and rusted bleachers, Caleb realized something. She didn't come to change him. She came because she finally understood him. The night air outside the community center was cool and quiet, the kind of stillness that only happened after the last folding chair had been stacked and the lights dimmed to their sleepy glow. Caleb and Natalie stood just beyond the front steps, beneath the wide old oak tree that had shaded 100 church picnics and 4th of July potlucks. Crickets chirped in the tall grass. The stars blinked overhead, unfiltered by city haze. And for once there was no one watching. No stage, no camera, no pressure, just them. Caleb leaned against the wooden railing, hands tucked in the pockets of his flannel, his voice softer now. "You know, a couple months ago, I was underneath a '98 Buick, singing to myself, just to fill the silence." Natalie smiled. "And I was sitting in the back seat of a broken-down SUV, wondering if I'd forgotten how to listen." He glanced at her. "You're not staying long, are you?" She shrugged. "I don't know yet." They were quiet for a moment, not because they didn't have things to say, but because finally there was no rush to say them. He looked down, then back at her. "I used to think dreams had to come with bright lights and big cities, that anything small couldn't possibly matter." "And now?" she asked. He gave her a small, sure smile. "Now I think the best things might be the ones that don't ask for attention. They just are." Natalie stepped a little closer, close enough that the space between them wasn't quite space anymore. "Funny," she said. "I came here thinking I could help you become something bigger." "You did?" Caleb replied. "Just not the way you thought." They stood there under the stars, not needing to fill the quiet, Because for the first time in a long time, it wasn't empty. It was full of what had been earned, what had been let go, and what had finally been found. Not fame, not fortune. Something real.